Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guests today are Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman. I will tell you about both in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show about dealing with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the courage we exert. And when you do it from a leadership position, as you will definitely discover that Scott and Jacquelyn are, you do it with a singular purpose of bringing people together for common cause. Welcome, Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman. So,
great to be here with you, John.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Great. Well, I want to tell folks all about you. So, Jacquelyn Lane is the president of 100 Coaches Agency and the co-designer of a proprietary curation process of relationship-first philosophy. She's been with the agency since its founding, and she is a critical pillar, to which I can attest, of 100 Coaches community. She comes to the world of executive coaching through her previous roles in the energy industry and her lifelong commitment to improving the lives of others. Scott Osman is the founder and CEO of 100 Coaches Agency, and again, co-designer of the curation process. So in his role as CEO, Scott has established the vision for the company, leads in the partnership development, and he co-founded 100 Coaches with Marshall Goldsmith in 2016. I am a member of the 100 Coaches, which, as I have told both Scott and Jacquelyn, has been transformative to me. So this is a thrill to interview both of you. Welcome, Jacquelyn and Scott. So,
thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Well, the reason you're here is not just to heap praise on you. It's because the two of you have written a new book with Marshall called Becoming Coachable. So there are a lot of books on coaching, Scott and Jacquelyn, but not many that I know of that talk about preparing yourself for coaching. What are those first steps that you need to think about before entering a coaching engagement? So,
Right.
Jacquelyn?
When we sat down to start thinking about a book, we were surprised to realize that there were no books really talking about how to engage in the coaching process and how coaching can unlock all of this learning and growth that's available to all of us. So what we did is we sat down and we analyzed the several hundred coaching engagements that we've now had the pleasure of observing, and saw that the leaders who are truly coachable are the people who go on to accomplish the most incredible results. And so we broke that down into 4 steps, which we call our openness framework. And so this is the way to determine if you are coachable and ready to engage in a coaching engagement. And so those are you open to change, open to feedback, open to taking action, and open to being held accountable?
Great. Now, Scott, you have a personal story about the coaching process that you first engaged in. So, and you write about it candidly. So tell us about that. So.
Yeah, John. So, I was a little late to coaching. I didn't know anything about executive coaching until maybe 10 years ago, and then became fully immersed in it. And, I had a career in, branding. I was a leader in many situations. I had a couple of my own companies. And when I started learning about coaching, I thought, gee, I'm here. I'm in the world of coaches. Maybe I'll have a coach. And I started asking people about who would be a good coach for me. And inevitably, I would end up getting coaching them. And then I realized the problem wasn't the coaches, of course. It never is. The problem was me, that I wasn't ready to be coached, that, as we now say, I wasn't coachable. And it took actually people like Jacquelyn to help me realize that I don't have to have all the answers, and that I need to start being open to getting feedback and making some changes. That led me to my first coaching engagement, which really happened just before we started working on the book. So the process of writing the book and the process of becoming coachable for me were very much happening at the same time.
Oh, that's great. No, I appreciate that. And I think that story is very powerful because, coaching has become kind of a buzzword term and people like it, but what does it really entail? And your candor says that, I was the issue and I don't have to have all the answers. And we as coaches don't. So Jacquelyn, I'm going to throw you the big question. So we talk about coaching transforming lives. So how does it do that? What's your perspective on that? So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think we would all say that leadership is really about relationships, right? Because a leader with no followers is just a guy taking a walk, right? And so, since leadership is all about relationships, and relationships are complex, coaching is really something that helps cut through some of that complexity to allow you to collect feedback from key stakeholders, from all the people that work around with and for you. And that helps you become more self-aware. It helps you understand your blind spots and understand how to be in better relationship with all of those people. And really, what that ultimately does is that transforms not only a person's leadership, but also their life as a whole.
that's great. Now, this one's for Scott. We're laying you open today, Scott. Here it is.
What is that?
You're easy to pick.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. How do we overcome resistance to receiving feedback, which of course comes in the coaching process, both from the coach as well as stakeholders? So what's your perspective, Scott?
Yeah, John, that's such a great question. And I hear people talk about feedback as this very difficult pill to swallow. That it's, you have to hear these things you don't want to hear about yourself. And I think that one of the great things about feedback, if you can change your perspective on what feedback really is and not hear it as criticism, but hear it as the gift that it really is, which is the gift of hearing the things that you can improve, and recognize that you can't really improve on things until you know what they are. I think that makes feedback a lot easier to handle. It still can be painful, but I think with the perspective of, if I know about it, I can change it. It becomes something that's constructive instead of destructive.
Right.
I think that the feedback, if it's going to be accepted or at least listened to, must come from a position of trust. So, and there's something I know that you both explore in the book is the topic of trust. Is that a coachable topic, Jacquelyn? So,
such a great question. Trust is such a core quality for any leader, and increasingly important in any organization. And I do think that trust can be improved by engaging in the coaching process. So, for example, trust is really built by being consistent in our words and our actions, in living our values, in having integrity, making sure we follow through on our commitments. And the great news is that a coach is someone who can help you do all of those things better and help identify some of those places where you may be falling short. It's a funny thing, like in leadership, we don't really get days off, right? So we have to show up very consistently. And I think it takes a team of people. It takes a support system to be able to do that and do it well. But again, I think the rewards are also great because our actions have major ripple effects through the organizations that we lead.
so true. And one of the beauties of this book is there are some wonderful stories of very successful people who themselves have gone through coaching, and they share it. Hubert Joly, Alan Mulally. And the one thing that you just said, Jacquelyn, is leaders don't get a day off. And I remember at our last meeting, Alan tells the story. He said, if I came out of a meeting with a frown, the stock price went down. So you're always on. Perspective, Scott? So.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, perspective. Yes, my perspective is Alan's always right. So that's an easy one. I heard the same thing framed another way, very similar. I want to attribute it to Dr. Jim Kim, who said, you don't own your face. When you're a leader, your face, your expressions, your emotions, your attitudes are almost property of the company, because they impact so many people. And at first, when I heard that, I thought, well, that's a pretty harsh statement. But then I recall that, very often when I'm trying to not be somebody who I'm not, but be somebody who might feel a little aspirational, I imagine that I'm playing the role of a character who's that aspirational person. And it allows me to disassociate it from sort of my own sort of ego and, negative tendencies, And by saying I don't own my face, it allows me to disconnect from that and recognize that my expressions don't have to be an expression of me. They need to be an expression of who I am as a leader. And that's very transformational.
Wonderful. I have never heard that phrase before, but it's something that I have written and talked about and coached before. I often talk about leadership as an act. And both the folks that Alan and Hubert Joly both understood that so profoundly in the way they interact with their colleagues, from the quote entry-level employees all the way to the board of directors, and so that's what makes this resonate. So leadership is an act. That doesn't mean you're dissembling or being disingenuous. It means you're being there, you're being present. I would say that.
Yeah.
Right. I love Marshall's question. Am I being the person I want to be right now? Right. I think that's totally aligned with what you just shared, John.
Yeah. John, I have to say, sometimes I say to people, leadership is an unnatural act because it doesn't come naturally to very many people. And it is the qualities of leadership are actually things that I think we can learn and be trained on. I think that's a big role that a coach plays.
Without question. And I think you recently just did a post on that. Leadership is not a natural act, and it's work. It's hard work. It's really hard work.
It is hard work.
So, and here's what makes, I think, this book resonate. And let's point out that Marshall Goldsmith is also an author on this book, and we all know Marshall's work and this foundational work in executive coaching. Both of you come from very interesting backgrounds. As far as I know, neither of you have a background in social psychiatry or social organizations, anything like that. So, Jacquelyn, what is your background and why coaching? And the same question.
Yeah. I probably have you would have been able to guess that I would end up in the coaching space because I studied chemical engineering. That's how you know it's a good fit. No, but I'm an engineer by training.
A lot of coaches out of that trade.
Yeah. But nonetheless, I've always been a people person and loved bringing people together. Even when I was working in corporate America, I very much enjoyed bringing teams together to solve complex problems. And I always naturally found myself on more the business side of things. But I will say that the problem solving that I learned in engineering school is very natural to the world of coaching as well. I just realized that people problems were the type of problems I was most interested in solving. And they tend to be some of the most complex problems to solve. So my husband actually became a coach about 5 or 6 years ago. And through that transition, I learned quite a bit about the industry and came to fall in love with the industry myself and made a transition from the world of energy into executive coaching. And I'm very, very blessed and fortunate to have found my way to 100 Coaches, which is really now my life's calling.
Yeah, I love the story of when you were getting your master's at Cambridge in sustainable engineering, right? How you made a pivot on your thesis. Tell that story.
Okay. Yeah. So I had originally gone into my master's program with a very reasonable thesis, something that really made sense given my background. I was going to do something in renewable energy. But at the very last minute, I just realized I didn't have a lot of passion for the topic, and I didn't want to take all of the time that was going to be required to do my thesis, doing a topic I wasn't so interested in. But I had been volunteering at some different refugee camps at the time. It was the height of the European refugee crisis in Europe. And so I instead shifted to do something with refugees, and I ended up working with a lot of different refugees and refugee service providers, primarily in Greece. And again, just came to realize just how complex this whole situation was, and came to realize that it was my love of people that really separated me. And so that was the big shift in my life and career that ultimately led me to the world of executive coaching.
And Scott, your first career that I know of, just a little bit paralleled mine, but you are way, way ahead of me because you were a photographer working as an assistant to Richard Avedon. Am I correct?
So, that is correct. That is correct. And I would say, photography, portrait photography in particular, absolutely prepared me for this. Because when you think about it, portrait photography is all about seeing people and the ability to connect with people and see them fully for who they are. And then in the case of photography, present them as an image. In the case of executive coaching, understand who they need to be connected with as a coach, and what kind of resource will help them become the full human being that they can be, the full leader they can be. It's funny. My careers have not been sort of seamless flow from one to the other. But when I look back at my life and all the different careers I had, each one of them contributed to who I am today and to make me, I think in many ways, just right for what I'm doing.
The reason I ask each of you to share your story is because I don't know that it's out of the norm today, because it's not, as certainly within 100 coaches and many of the coaches that we know, they don't all have a background in psychology, many from business, but I love yours in engineering. Scott, your portraiture, photography, the career that you've done, the threads, that gives the coach, both of you, I know you're gifted in your trade, in your craft, perspective on where we are. And I think that's so important when we're working with, because we as executive coaches, we're the outsiders. And many times, while we may not know, for at least certain first time, we don't know the culture of the organization, we've been around the block. And so we've seen these things before. So, but having a depth of a background from different experiences, I think adds to the perspective. And all of us as coaches, I may be the best for Jacquelyn, you may be the best for me, Scott, or whatever. We all have something to offer and do our best. Now, here's the tough question about that we hear, and you do too. Leaders want to improve, executives, okay? But then we have these moments of stress, and so we revert. Jacquelyn, do you want to tackle that question? How can coaching address those moments of stress?
Absolutely. You know, there's a great book written by our friends Carol Kaufman and David Noble, Real-Time Leadership, that's come out recently. And that book is all about how to respond to situations in that moment well, showing up as the person you want to be in each moment. And again, I think the coaching tool set actually lends itself quite nicely to this. Sometimes you can practice in role plays, right? You have a very stressful situation, you can act it out a few times and just make sure that you will respond in that moment the way that you want to respond. But, you know, for all of us, it is hard. Leaders are responsible. Leaders are in charge. They have a lot of responsibility for things. And yet, if a leader wants to have any longevity, they really need to be open to reinventing themselves, to making change, and to showing up the way that they want to be showing up in each moment.
And that leads right into the next question for Scott about what role does humility play? Because I know certainly with emerging leaders, but also very established leaders, some may perceive humility as showing weakness.
Yeah, that is such a great question. We talk about this and think about this a lot. Personally, I think the most difficult transition a leader has to go through is their entire life. They spend their entire life, and leaders are often very successful people, getting A's, getting gold stars, being successful, being the winner, and then all of a sudden they reach the pinnacle of all of that and they become a leader. And when they become a leader, everybody else has to be the star, right? I think Alan often says the role of a leader is to set the vision and then support everybody else to do their work, which is the work of the company. And humility has to be at the center of that, because if you think that it's all about you, then you can't distribute the way you need to all of the amazing people around you and help them elevate to their best selves. And that is it's a key thing. It also, I think, is very aligned with the loneliness of leadership, right? And the leader, again, fundamentally, the leader stands alone. The decisions rest with them. The support, they have to support people to do their best work, but if the best work fails, they're held responsible, and they don't really have anybody to turn to because, as we mentioned before, they don't even own their own face. They can't even be sad or unhappy or angry, because that is bad for everybody. And again, so that's the important role of a coach, to help the leader recognize that they're not alone.
Yes.
That they have someone to talk to.
I know the loneliness of the leader is a topic that Marshall talks about again and again with all of us. And That's so important, and it's isolating. And so having connections outside the organization, having a life outside the organization, people that don't report to you, that's so critical. So now, as we get to this, where the rubber meets the road, the topic of accountability. So we know it's important, but why do we sometimes shy from it, Jacquelyn? So,
Well, because it's uncomfortable is the short answer. Even feedback, you can hear feedback from somebody and you can kind of choke a smile and choke out a thank you and move on. But accountability is, as you said, John, where the rubber really meets the road. So if you think of a personal trainer at a gym, right, they will know if you're showing up or not showing up. And, and they're there and you're paying for it regardless. And a coach is sometimes a little bit like that. It's not just about, saying thank you and hearing the feedback. It's not just about saying I'll change. It's about actually taking the action, showing up and doing it consistently, even when it's hard. And that's where the real growth comes in, because you can't get stronger unless you do the reps.
that's good. I like that. Now, essential to that is we've talked about coaching. It's an individual exercise. And Scott, I'd like your perspective on this. Is how can we talk about coaching helping us understand ourselves, but it can do more. It can make us aware of the feelings and the aspirations of others. What's your perspective on that, Scott?
Gosh, questions are awesome and difficult. I remember that's one of the first things that I learned with a coach was as I said, I've been meeting coaches for a while, and I finally met a coach, and this coach was like right time and the right unlock. And for me, the coach said, if you don't know what to work on, let's work on expansion. And that has helped me understand that no matter how good I think I am, no matter how successful I've been, whatever I think is a limitation, right? So no matter how well I think I know other people or know myself, that knowledge in and of itself is just a limitation. It's a box that I'm going to put that's going to constrain my true knowledge of anything. And a coach can really help us understand that those limitations are self-imposed and don't need to exist.
And I think, Jacquelyn, that's where the stakeholder feedback would come in, because we have our perspectives of who we are. So what's your experience in sharing that kind of feedback with a leader? So,
well, it's hard to receive feedback. It's hard to give feedback. And that's why the coaching process can be so helpful in just getting that cycle started once again. It's very natural when someone becomes a leader for feedback to dry up, and they don't hear that anymore. So you have to constantly be asking for that feedback. Please tell me how I'm doing. I want to check in with you. And then creating a safe enough space, building that environment of trust, to use your word earlier, John, so that they feel they can share that feedback candidly and know that they're not going to be retaliated against for that. I've been on the winning and losing side of providing feedback, and I've also, I'll say, received feedback well and received feedback not so well. Good news is there is certainly grace for that. We're all learning and growing. And I think coachability is really a spectrum. I don't think we ever really arrive. We can always become better leaders. We can always learn and grow. We can always become more coachable. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to grow in that area myself.
Great. I am often asked about people outside our field or whatever tell me about coaching. What can I expect? And I know what I'm going to say now. I'm going to say, get this book.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, Scott, because you're heading the agency, you are representing engaging leaders with coaches. What is your pitch, or what's your perspective that you want to convey to someone new to it or considering it? So
thanks. It's very generous of you. The agency works at a very elite level. So we are working primarily with CEOs, C-suite, major value creators within companies. So a lot of our coaching is very bespoke. We spend a lot of time, Jacquelyn and I, listening to what are the needs of the person who's looking for a coach, and then helping them find the coach that they need. Having said that, as Jacquelyn mentioned, we've done this hundreds of times now, and there's a lot of sort of pattern matching that is coming up. The most important thing I think that any leader is looking for from a coach is how to help them get beyond themselves. What that means is going to be different for each person. But I think that when people come to coaching, the first thing they recognize is they have limitations that they have not been able to push through. And sometimes I think a good coach is merely a sort of the WD-40, a little bit of grease to help them work through something that they maybe, if they pushed hard enough, they could work through on their own, but they'd be doing it in a way that'd be grinding too many other people's gears. But maybe it's some insight that helps them really truly unlock and explore a lot, beyond what they ever thought was possible. We see very frequently in coaching within months, although coaching really should last a year or longer. But within months, people start expanding the sense of what's possible, and once you open up the sense of what's possible, you can grow into it.
Yeah.
Right. Jacquelyn, do you have a perspective on that? Because you're working in the placement of well and understanding the clients too. So do you have a point of view you want to share on that?
Sure, happy to. I love that every coaching engagement is really tailor-made for each person. You really set the goals and set the metrics for success, and then your coach helps you systematically address those day after day, week after week. And it's that consistency over time that leads to outstanding results. And not only do people achieve major milestones like raising a large round of funding or reaching some major financial milestone, or getting a big promotion or whatever it may be, but they also in the process naturally learn how to be better human beings, to be in relationships with other people better. And by taking a much bigger perspective and understanding just how much of an impact they really have on the world around them and how interconnected we all are. And in the process of doing that, you really unlock what we call human flourishing, which is really about understanding that we all succeed together. And really, leaders are some of those people they're like the pebble dropped into the pond, and the ripple effects of that go out far and wide. And we're really excited about the prospect of these people, again, getting coached, becoming coachable, and creating a world that is the world we all want to live in.
Right. I'm glad you touched on flourishing, because that's a theme in this book. And I love that term. It's not, you talk about, in the book, you talk about striving, which you had alluded to, Scott, about getting to where you want to be. But it's more than that. It's this flourishing, which leads me into my favorite topic of grace. So I'm going to put you both on the spot. Do you have I think grace is an avenue. I call it the catalyst for the greater good. Grace enables us to flourish. Do you have a story that you would like to share with us?
The story that keeps coming to mind for me is actually coming to 100 Coaches. I had just made a transition out of a corporate career. Wasn't really sure what was next for me. But then Scott shared his vision for creating an agency. And I heard that, and I immediately knew in my soul, like, this is something I feel very called to. And, as we mentioned earlier, my work experience to that point really hadn't indicated that would be a natural career step for me. But again, that heart and that passion was there. And I'm so grateful to have known and met someone like Scott in that moment who really saw me and recognized what I was capable of. And so I said, I think I might be the partner to help you build this. And he said, I agree. And, the last 3 years have been a really amazing journey together.
Proven that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you both do lead with grace, and I personally am a beneficiary of that. So I say thank you. So where can we find Becoming Coachable?
Well, you can certainly, obviously, it's going to be available on Amazon. It launches on September 19th. Go to www, of course, becomingcoachable.com, and all the information about the book, a little bit of our history. And I would say keep coming back to it. Our intention is to create a community around the idea of becoming coachable and coachable people. So over the course of the next few months, we have some real surprises that are going to be rolling out for people. We're excited for people to join us in the conversation.
Yeah.
Well, it has been my pleasure to have Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman join us today on Grace Under Pressure and Becoming Coachable. It's a really good book. So I recommend it highly if you're considering being coaching or just curious about bettering yourself. So thank you both for being on the show today. And with that, we will go out. So
Thank you,
Thank you, John.
John. We're so grateful.